Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here. I know that your brains are saturated. You've had so many ahas and insights today. I'm a walker so that I can see everybody. So I just want to equally share the love with all sides of the room. So I do also want to make sure that we're connecting the dots. This is my role, so I'm delighted to be here to do that for you, is sort of to put all of the pieces today together so that you can move into this collective action plan, right? Because I know you've probably heard that you should start with the why. Have you heard this? You should start with the why. Sorry, Simon, that's actually not true from a neuroscience perspective. You actually need to start with the so what. So what is what our brain is always making value judgments. That's its job. Every second it's making a value judgment. Is this data, is this information important? And how is it important? So you want to start with the so what. So that's why we're going to connect the dots, because the brain needs that to move into the how to. So your brain is always doing predicting, value judgments, and action plans, always. So we're going to kind of do that. As a neuroscientist, I also know that your ability to retain and focus is about 50% of what I'm saying. So luckily, we're recording this for you. So my hope is for you to have some fun, because I know that I am standing between you and a reception. So I'll keep it fast and entertaining for you as well. But I want to cover what this means for you. So we've really heard today some emerging threats. And we are in a constant state of permacrisis at this point. And you've heard about the role of philanthropy and the creating and solutions. And what I want to talk about is you. You've been waiting all day for this, haven't you, to talk about you? So I want to talk about you and what is your role? What skills do you need to acquire to start putting these dots together? And how can you start putting this into action? So one of the most important things is I'm only going to give you 3 things so you can remember them, okay? The first one I'm going to talk about is fractals. I'm going to talk about fractals, and Gab sort of referred to it in the beginning in her opening remarks. She talked about this concept of nested systems, so complex adaptive systems. So we'll talk just a bit about that and your role in this, okay? And then the second thing I'm going to talk about is AQ. It's called adversity intelligence. You may have also heard it as adaptive intelligence. It's become a very big buzzword. But we're going to talk about how do you actually really rapidly upskill yourself in this intelligence. It is a learned capability, adversity intelligence. Okay? It's what I've studied, so I'm going to talk about it. And then we're going to talk about the third thing, which is co-regulation. And it is this phenomenal power we have as a human species to actually control someone else's brain and body, and how we need to begin using that ability as a human species for good instead of harm. So I'm going to talk about those kind of 3 key things. Is that okay? All right. So I know a good majority of you in this room are nonprofits, or you're in the social change enterprise sector, which means that you are most likely spending your days in storming, we would call it. And it feels like you're never going to get out of this phase of storming. And the short answer is you won't, so hang in. But I'm going to give you tools for survival, so okay. And you're facing most often burnout, because you tend to be what we would call HSPs, so you're highly sensitive persons. And so you tend to cellularly, you're kind of spongy, and that is a neuroscience word, you're welcome. You are spongy to more of the stress of the world, which means you very rapidly become cortisol neurotoxic. And you face burnout, and you face the stress of every day having to fight for funding, to fight for your cause, to do all of the things you've heard today. Your brain is overwhelmed with the to-do list that never ends, in addition to you trying to change the world that often doesn't want to be changed. So I want to talk a bit about you, because you're on the front lines of it all. And that's why you're important. So the first thing I want to talk about is this concept of fractals. And it's really hard for me to talk with only one hand. So, because I talk with my hands. So I kind of want to talk about this understanding. Have you heard of fractals? You know what I'm talking about? Fractals? Okay, we're going to talk about quantum physics for just a minute, but I'm going to keep it fun. All right. So it's this concept that Gab referred to in her opening remarks about we are fractals of a complex, adaptive, nested system. You can write that down. Okay, what does that mean? Okay, have you ever seen these little Russian wooden dolls? And you like unscrew it, and there's another little Russian wooden doll, and you unscrew it, and there's another, and you go all the way down. Sometimes like 8 dolls in one. Yes? That's what you are. You're the little doll. Okay, unexplained. Okay, so we are part of a universal complex adaptive systems, which means that at even the biggest level, all the way down to the smallest level, like the dolls, our systems behave in self-same ways. And they're so intricately connected that what happens in one level creates disturbances in others. And what does that mean? Okay, so at the very top of our system, think we have planetary and ecological systems. So you heard people talk about that a bit today. So think about it. We have solar systems, weather systems, water systems. See where we're going? We're systems. And then within that, you kind of unscrew that little doll. And within that system, we have sociological systems. We have human systems and animal systems. We have governments and communities and states and nation states and sub-states. And within that, you kind of unscrew it a little bit, we have organizations and teams and groups and nonprofits and social change enterprises, right? Then you kind of take that nested system, and within that system, we have the individual, we have human beings, and you are a nested system all in yourself. You have neural systems and an immune system. You have a nervous system. You're full of systems. And then we take that apart and we go to the very micro level, cellular level. You have atoms and molecules and neurons and dendrites. Those are all behaving in systems. From your tiniest cellular makeup, your disturbances or your health in your system ripples out to all the others and vice versa. Think about it. What happened with COVID? It was way up here in planetary ecological systems, wasn't it? It was so small you didn't even see it. And it was a disturbance in its system. It actually righted its system. Who's the disease? We are. Okay. So it righted its system. It really did. It corrected and healed a lot of its system. But what happens is when we have a disturbance in our nested systems at any level, it vibrationally shifts the other systems, and oftentimes in very graduated ways, meaning that it was a small change up here and it rippled out sociological systems. Pretty big deal. What happened in many countries, what happened in governments, right? It rippled even bigger in organizations. Many businesses didn't survive, many struggled to make it. And even the biggest in humanity, we lost lives. Right? It goes the other way too. We've talked a lot about these few people on the planet causing massive disruption in the other systems, right? 1 or 2 people making decisions because they're neurobiologically unhealthy, but okay. So they're making decisions that are causing ripple effects, tremendous ripple effects throughout the other systems. Is that okay? We got that? Okay. So why are we talking about quantum physics? I'm so glad you asked. Okay. Because you're a fractal. You're a tiny nested doll. And oftentimes we feel like we are powerless. We feel like we're very frustrated in fighting this complex adaptive system. But the most important piece is we're not focusing on the tools we need as part of that fractal. That's why we're going to talk about AQ. So, you know, and you even had Don talk about how you need your strategy and your elevator pitch. Great. I'm going to tell you, you can have all the leadership training in the world, but you're not getting the one thing you need. You need adaptive or adversity intelligence. And that is a skill that you can learn. We are, in fact, one of the most adaptive species on the planet. We are remarkably adaptable. Okay? What happens is we get stuck in this concept of linear, right? So like I'm a job, I have a role, I have a function, and we expect things to be linear. And we get stuck in this storming idea of things. But if you understand that you are a fractal in a complex adaptive system that is always in motion. Right now, you are vibrating. You're vibrating particles of carbon and nitrogen, and you're just atoms vibrating. You vibrate so much that you give off about 40 millirem of radioactive energy a year. Sleeping next to someone for 8 hours, you get 2 millirem of radioactive energy. You get more radioactive energy sleeping next to someone than if you lived next to a nuclear plant. Yes, you are vibrating particles of energy. What does that mean? Because adaptive intelligence is the skill you need to go from surviving to thriving. There are ways, very easy ways, that we can learn to move from a state of stress. Because when we're stressed, our brain actually blocks our ability to our prefrontal cortex. Why is that so important? Because that's where empathy, perspective taking, judgment, reasoning, SQ, MQ, EQ, you name it, all of these executive functioning skills that we talk about are there. And when you're stressed and you're in your sympathetic nervous system, you don't have access to those. So how do we go from living 98 to 100% of our day not having access to our adaptability intelligence or adversity intelligence? How do we find that trigger? And that's adversity intelligence. It's skills where you learn how to have calm in the chaos, where you learn how to very quickly trigger your neurobiological system into the parasympathetic. Because that's the key. So if we can learn how to actually hack into our brain in the moment, we can tap into and override our predictive capabilities. We can begin to have foresight and vision for the future. We can actually tap into higher order functioning that we didn't have access to before. But those are skills that we have to really rapidly upskill on if we're going to survive. Because I'm going to say this again, AQ is the skill you need to create systems change in a complex adaptive system. The system is always adaptive. It's always moving. It's always changing. So if you learn how to have a high level of adaptive intelligence, you will learn how to manipulate nested systems. Okay? I know this works. I work in post-war countries. We can easily manipulate systems if we can train people on how to really understand what adversity intelligence is. Okay? The third thing I want to talk about is co-regulation. Because as a human species, we are always co-regulating. This means that without speaking, we are always communicating. I'm going to sit next to you just for a second. Okay. Because within a few minutes of sitting next to one another, hi, if we trust each other, that's the key, our heart rates will begin to match. And within about 3 minutes, our breathing will completely synchronize. Cool. Yes, very cool. And if we're thinking aloud on a problem and we're both plugged up to an MRI, you will see that her electrical and chemical activity will begin to mirror mine. We are so intricately connected that our brains actually talk to other brains vibrationally. This is wild. It's true. Okay? But we don't use this power for great good. We get very stressed and we are biologically wired to react to each other's nervous system. If I'm stressed, I trigger you. I don't care if you're a Buddhist monk. I just tripped you. Because we're supposed to protect each other. We're a herd species. You've seen the herds in the wilderness, right? They'll all be out getting water. The wildebeest, one will get up, pop its head up. Within minutes, the entire herd takes off. Only maybe one or two heard a noise, but they're a herd species that is communicating vibrationally, and we are as well. I say all this to say, because when we're in high states of stress, we are walking around vomiting our stress and co-regulating all of our teams and our broader network into stress. When we do that, they don't have access to higher order brain capabilities. They don't have empathy, perspective taking, foresight, future visioning. So if we're talking about creating massive change throughout our teams and our systems, our broader systems, sociological systems, and our planetary and ecological systems, we have to understand the tiniest of fractal, which is our neurobiology. And the way in which we use this phenomenal power to co-regulate, we can control each other in massive ways. We can co-regulate for peace. We can co-regulate for calm instead of chaos. We can co-regulate for trust instead of trauma. We can co-regulate for health instead of harm. I promise, I've taught hostage negotiations at Johns Hopkins. You can do this, okay? The goal for this and my invitation for you today is that if you understand as a tiny vibrating particle of complex, adaptive, nested systems, that your ability to regulate your particles directly impacts your ripple effect throughout the entire other systems. We use this term ripple effect. That's it. It's quantum physics. Whatever tiny disturbance happens on one level creates a ripple effect on the other. That's why I said if we had all these world leaders in a much healthier neurobiological state, the world would be less disturbed. I'm really serious. Okay. Right? And so that's my gift. And my invitation is, as we move out to this reception, for you to sort of understand and embrace what it means to be a system. Look around the room, wave to each other. Really, look around the room. You're all looking at me. Look. This is your system. And in order to be a subsystem within a nested system, and in order to create change, the ecosystem has to move in unison. Do you feel like you move in unison with the rest of the people in the room? Sometimes. Some of us, we start with our own teams. Do we feel like we move in unison? Okay. The understanding is this, that in a system, by definition, is interrelated, interdependent, but it's independent parts acting as a whole. Have you ever seen the murmuration of starlings? Do you know what I'm talking about? They're the tiny little birds. And if you've ever been to like the Netherlands and UK and other places, it is the most phenomenal thing of nature that you will ever see. Hundreds of thousands, we've even clocked them up to millions of birds. They don't fly together all day long. You know this, right? They fly in tiny little groups, their own little groups. But when it comes time to find a safe place to stay for the evening, they will all find each other. And they begin to swoop and slide. Have you seen this? It's the most phenomenal shapes and sways. They don't run into each other, by the way. Never. They don't run into each other. And they're forming and working in unison to distract the hawks. who will watch for where they're going to roost. So they're forming lots of distracting patterns and fell swoops. They're like mesmerizing the hawks with their dance, and then they'll go foop and just sink and disappear whenever they find a place to roost. And for the longest time, we didn't actually understand how they did it. How do they don't know each other? They meet up in the evenings and never run into each other and pivot so rapidly. And a couple of years ago, we sort of figured it out. They map to 7 other birds, all different. Everybody is individually mapping to 7 others randomly. And they communicate vibrationally through the wings. And they can pivot in a millisecond. My invitation to you is to become a group of starlings. 7 others. If everybody maps to 7, somehow we'll get everybody included. Right? And if we are co-regulating vibrationally, we can create massive transformation. Is that okay? So I'm going to leave us with the invitation to go out so we can co-regulate, start communicating, sharing a little oxytocin, so that we can co-regulate to co-create something amazing today. Is that okay? All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.